Hello and welcome to Protomotive. I have got a 993 back here with roof wheels on it. Beautiful car, but we actually have a complete turbo kit going out for a 996 turbo. We've got all the parts together and all powder coated and all shined up and ready to pack, and we thought it'd be really fun to kind of go through those to show you what each one is, what you're getting, and what each one's doing. It's following along basically with the awesome 996 turbo street bolt-on build. You can see on our website. Here, let me flip this around. Sorry. Okay, you can probably do a screenshot from the website, but basically we're going to kind of go down through the list here and tell you what we've got going on. I mean, apparently it's starting the list, Porsche 996 turbo tuning that we'll work on once the system's installed. But then we get down to the turbo upgrades. This particular one is running K16 65G2 turbo upgrades, which are based on the original K16 with a real nice compressor wheel going on in there. 65mm compressor wheel. We've run these with great boost response up in the low 600 wheel range, 630 wheel horsepower. They run factory size turbine wheels. No real reason to pick that up. Make sure we actually grab the K16 off the shelf. This particular customer has his own turbochargers, so we just have these out here for display. Next on the list is 996 turbo, either bolt-on or intercoolers for big. I wish I had a set of bolt-on here to show you, but basically the difference between the bolt-on and the big build, the inlets are going to be the same. We're using factory style clip-in receptacles there, but all billet stuff. But then when you go to the big build, you're getting the blow-off valves mounted on the inlet tank of it. We've got the block-off plates so that we can run our Fenderwell intake plumbing, and then we've got the large fabricated outlet tanks that come all the way up over the engine mount, rather than the factory style or bolt-on. The cast housing comes up and it comes back, and this inlet is back here, which kind of compromises the tank on the intercooler, the flow of it. This flow, like a third of the flow, has to go up through this tiny region here, collect with this. Then you've got all this flow from the intercooler collecting into a much smaller area, then flowing out of the nozzle here. So the big build ones that get our YPipe get the advantage of the large fabbed outlet tanks. 2.5-inch outlets rather than the smaller clip-in receptacles. Even though the clip-in receptacles look large, the inside diameter is small because it's got a lot going on between the O-rings and the clips and the hose crimping and everything else. They're kind of the equivalent of maybe a 2-inch tube versus 2.5 here. So these all fit through the factory openings in the car. What do we got next? The fin on the side here is for the, not grommet, but the rubber strip that holds the lower outlet in place. So everything goes back together like it should in the car rather than having to hack it up. The next are Fenderwell intakes. These become quite popular, have worked out really well. These are actually, they're oval there up into 4-inch here. This particular customer this one has our K16, K24 inlet adapters that snap on the intake side of the compressor housing, and then the boot clamps on over top of it to bring you up, and this bolts into a factory chassis location. A stud up in the Fenderwell that normally retains the intercooler frame, but instead we replace it with this. This lays up on top of the intercooler core to use the Fenderwell intake that's right behind your door to feed the air filter in the intercooler. The strap here goes with it. Since we're having to trim the liner out, we remove one of the mounts for the liner, and this replaces that, and it bolts onto another factory stud up underneath the fender. And so again, you're not screwing into the car or anything. You're using all factory pieces. And of course, there's driver's side there and a passenger side. On the 996 turbo, they're flat. Ground strap clearance is fine. On 997 turbo, up in the backside right here, there's a big clearance for the chassis ground, so you don't have to mod that either. Trying to make these as bolt-on as possible. This is fun here. Whoop. There it is. Okay, yep. Protomotive green filters. This particular size is about impossible to find anywhere. 9-inch long, 4-inch inlet. We had to taper the top way down to clear the intercooler because of the taper of the Fenderwell. So they're all custom made for this application. We have plenty of them in stock. I should probably post the filters themselves online and not just the whole kit, so you can get replacement filters when you want. Next up is 80-pound fuel injectors with rail adapters. We've got 80-pound Bosch injectors. This particular set, right now they're sized for 60 millimeter O-ring to O-ring. They'd go in 993 turbo. You can pull the lower off and it's got an extended tip, 997 turbo style, or in this application we'll pull the upper off, and that makes it a 51 millimeter O-ring to O-ring. That's a direct replacement with no fuel rail relocation necessary. So those will pop in there. I'll pull these tops off before we ship these. On a 996 turbo, they've got 40-pound injector stock. So going from 40 to 80, obviously we're doubling the fuel capacity. So stock 40-pound injectors, 6 cylinders, 240, brings you to 480 at 3 bar. Brings you up in the low 500s at 3.8 bar, and a little higher on 5 bar. So the 80-pound injectors are giving you on pump gas actually high 900s worth of fuel, almost 1,000. Everything else would support it, but the factory chassis line won't. So that's another story. But for just the bolt-on stuff, these will give you plenty for a bolt-on kit. No worries there. Next, we got the single Walbro drop-in pump. Simple enough. 3D printed PA12 nylon, so it's not hygroscopic. Used to do these in the nylon 910. They're super strong, but they would draw in a little bit of the moisture. This all plugs into the factory quick connects, and this will sit down here like that in the car. We've got the connector that you'll cut off the factory connector to plug onto there. This drops right in. You pop your pump out of the OEM basket and drop this guy in, and voila, you got a 450 in the OEM basket with basically all OEM hookups and plenty of fuel. Then if you need, the second hole here is for another Walbro 450, which we run those on typically on the big E85 cars. That'll give you somewhere in the 12 to 1300 wheel horsepower range of power on E85 with the appropriate chassis line upgrades and stuff. Next on the list, Protomotive YPipe to intercoolers here. Protomotive YPipe. This particular one went with a 74 millimeter throttle body and replacement plenum. Interesting color there with the blue. It's kind of fun. The customer had a RAL number that he wanted this all done in, so we went ahead and purchased that. Again, we're trying to make this as factory as possible. We've got the factory inputs or vacuum connections for the fuel pressure regulator, for the T that goes to the blow-off valves, and for this one goes over to the check valves that feeds the secondary air pump solenoid and the blow-off valve solenoid up top here. Well, go ahead and attach this guy. We've got your check valve that's going to go over to the oil tank. This guy is going to go over to your fuel tank vent solenoid. And this is going to go to the Venturi tube for the brake booster, that the other side of the Venturi tube goes over here. And you can either use a factory OEM N75 on the pressure port, factory map and intake air temp sensor, or this can be taken out to a Greddy or something. And that's all hand fabricated thin wall tubing, nice and lightweight, 065, 6061 tubing and powder coated, and using 5-ply silicone with constant torque hose clamps, basically the stuff that you'll see on semi trucks. Loads of boost and fun without having issues with it blowing off. Next we've got Plenum. Okay, yep, already talked about that. Greddy Profec. Got that here for external boost control. Not necessary, we can do it both ways. You can use the factory N75 valve or Greddy or whatever you like, HKS. We like the controller in the car. It's kind of fun to have flexible tuning. If you got a 700 horsepower car and you want to hand it to your kids to go on a hot date or prom or something like that, or you're out playing in the mountains and the road conditions aren't great and it's wet out, you turn the boost controller off and you're not stuck at 700 horsepower all the time. You can actually turn it down to close to stock power levels, usually in the 500s. So we usually set them up with 500, 600, 700 horsepower, scalable at just the touch of a button. Our tuning is flexible enough to work with that. And then what else we got? Lightweight front pulley, our Protomotive pulley kit. It's using the GT3 sizing, so it's reduced in size to reduce the parasitic loss. It reduces the load on the crank, on decel. What we've also done on these is here where it goes on the crank snout is very deep. The OEM one is barely 2 or 3 millimeters there and it's just barely hanging on. These you actually gotta toss in either a pot of boiling water or the heat gun, heat them up to shrink fit them onto the end of the crank, so it keeps you from damaging the end of the crank, and it gives the pulley a whole lot better chance to stay where it should. And because of the depth of all this, one thing we've noticed other shops are missing is the bolt. Most of them are using a factory length bolt, and when you go from a steel pulley to an aluminum pulley, the depth in here is a lot deeper and you're losing threads. And if you're supposed to torque that sucker up to 145 plus foot-pounds with a stock bolt, you've barely got, I don't know, like 5 or 6 millimeters of thread engagement. So we make these 5 millimeters longer. You end up with a ton of thread engagement with the longer bolt. It's the longest one we can fit in there. We've directly compensated for the depth. These pulleys will fit factory cranks with the 5 millimeter pin. This pin is for GT3 cranks. And when you put it on the GT3 crank, we've got all the timing marks on here. It's nice when you're building the engines, when you don't have to rely on the factory point here that lines up with a very crude casting mark. Let's see if we can see that here. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if you can see that, but that sucker back here is pretty terrible to work with. Aha. Okay, there we go. So it's so far away from the pulley, it's offset from the case center line. So we just put both marks. So you got the choice to use the factory mark or the case center line old school. So it makes it much easier. And then the appropriate belt, of course. And what else do we got here? Billet blow valves. We've got those mounted here on the intercooler, on the inlet of the intercooler. We already talked about the intercoolers, but here's the billet blow valves. Nice pieces. They do require maintenance, unlike the factory diaphragm style. These are a piston with a O-ring, so now and then you do have to unthread the top and clean and relubricate the O-rings on those. Then here we got an upgraded clutch on the website, which this particular client had already purchased that before, so we don't have that listed. But then what's not on this list, I'm seeing, oh yeah, I skipped right over it. Can't miss that. XPipe here right in front of us. Here's our Protomotive XPipe. Yeah, we just recently started 3D printing the center sections. We're having a little fun with that. We're thinking about 3D printing some really custom cool tips. We're gonna have some fun with the aerodynamic design on that. Running resonators on these things. So you can see the flow is not compromised. We are not merging into each other, but crossing over completely. So you've got basically a full 3-inch all the way from one side all the way out to the tip, and then some coming out of the tip. These have been fantastic. I've run these on 1300 wheel horsepower cars and pulled the exhaust off and put straight pipes on it. The boost changes a little bit, 1 or 2 psi, and then you just put the boost back where it should be, and power comes right back up right where it was. So there's a minor difference. 1300 horsepower, 2 psi. It's doing pretty good for a street exhaust. It sounds fantastic. Doesn't drone, doesn't resonate. Is nice and quiet for driving around. Good for neighborhoods, but at the same time, it's nice and aggressive when you get on it and you really want it. It's plenty of fun. There it is. 996 turbo, 700 horsepower kit. Getting ready to go out the door. I think this one's going to Canada. I'll have lots of fun with this, and we'll give them a hand with the tuning once it's on there. We'll tune and data log and go back and forth and help them out till it's just perfect. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, throw them down in the comments or shoot me an email or give me a call. I'll be happy to help, and you can have a lot of fun with this. Sorry, trying to flip the camera thing over. Keep slipping around. Anyway, see you again in the next video. Appreciate you. Thank you. Bye-bye.